coming from a culturally diverse background has brought its challenges. There are unconscious biases, there is discrimination, there is racism, and I've faced all three of those things. But also being part of the LGBTI community has meant some challenges as well. And the intersection of both cultural diversity and sexuality, in my case, has been particularly challenging in my career.
The intersections of my identity are I'm white, I'm cisgender, I'm tertiary educated, and I'm a lesbian. So there are aspects of my identity that place me firmly in positions of privilege, particularly being white and cisgendered, and aspects that place me in a minority. But by and large, the way that plays out in my life is that I occupy a position of privilege relative to others in my community. And I think for me, that plays out in keeping that at the forefront of my mind in terms of how I can be a better ally to the queer community and use my position of privilege positively.
There are obviously a lot of different aspects to my identity and the journey that I've taken in my identity. I think what's been really, really helpful is seeing how people perceive me now versus how people perceived me even a few years ago. And I think when a lot of people see me, they see an effeminate gay man, which is fine, but I think there's more to it. And I think through my own history of marginalization, it makes me a lot more, I have a lot more empathy for people of different marginalized backgrounds, and because I'm able to blend in a lot of circumstances, I think it's really, really important that when other people are being talked about in offensive or demeaning ways, that I'm able to stand up for them, because there's been a lot of circumstances where my rights have been debated, but people don't know my identity and they haven't stood up for myself or the community. And so I think through having that experience, it's really, really important for me to always make sure that I stand up if anyone's ever being racist or sexist, to always call that out.
I'm an open book, and I'm really happy for anyone to ask me anything. I love to talk to people. I prefer a direct question. If you're polite and respectful, I'm really happy to talk to you about my community, my lived experience as someone who has a hearing impairment, as someone who's part of the LGBTIQ community myself. And in my experience, if you're polite and respectful, you're interested and you want to learn, people in my community are always happy to talk about their lived experience. They're happy to share.
The most important thing is to never make assumptions about people. And of course, we get this all the time. I get this all the time. I have to come out probably at least once a month, if not once a week, when I'm talking about my wife, for example. So I think it's really about being respectful, about asking, about being conscious of your unconscious bias, if you can do that. And as I said, just asking the person whether or not that person's comfortable about talking about these topics, and being respectful in the dialogue, and whether or not people want to talk about their identity, their gender identity, their sexuality. That's obviously a matter of personal choice, and that has to be respected at all time. And obviously, outing people is never, ever, ever cool, and should never be done. So I think, provided it's approached in as I said, a respectful, I keep coming back to that word way, then that's the most important thing.
So I think the best way to go about this is, if you have a question, to do independent research first. I know that if someone has a question about me and the broader community, it's pretty easy to tell when they've done their own independent research versus when I'm the first person that they're coming to. You know, even if the person isn't bang on, I guess, the appropriate way to ask, it's usually, it doesn't matter as long as I can tell that they've tried. And there's a huge difference between asking those, I think, questions for understanding versus questions that maybe are intrusive or personal or based on something political that's happening at the time.
A frustrating part of being part of the LGBTI community is the continual need to come out in a workplace setting, in a personal setting, in a friendship setting, in a family setting. And this can be tiresome for people who are part of the LGBTI community. It can lead to what we call self-editing, where you conceal a certain part of your identity for fear that you may be discriminated against. To improve things for members of the LGBTI community, communities should ensure that other people feel safe and comfortable in their presence. Other people are able to come out at their own pace and are able to feel welcome without any assumptions as to who they are and what they identify as.
I'm part of a community that suffered a lot of discrimination. I can say, like, you know, in the past 6 months, I've, you know, been threatened, like, in a barber shop for being gay, and I've, like, had trouble getting my name changed at the bank. It's not work that I want to have to do, especially if it's not done in a respectful way. But that being said, if someone, you know, tries to educate themselves, then cool, and I'm cool with that. They just need to try and do some work before I'll do work for them.
I identify as Christian. It has been a journey finding peace as a Christian lesbian.
I think I want to start by saying that religion plays such an important part in our society, even though the numbers of people who identify as religious is declining. I think in many ways, religion is at least one of the bedrocks of our community. So it's really important to approach organised religion with respect and a level of empathy. And I personally, while not being religious per se, I'm spiritually curious in the sense that I'm very interested in the history of religion and the impact that it has on our society. So I think that's where I come at this question from. And so to the extent that as a non-believer I can have an understanding of religion and its interaction with the queer community, I think that it is entirely compatible. Organised religion can and is in some instances entirely compatible with including people from the LGBTQIA community.
Faith and religion are two separate though related concepts. Matthew 22 states to love God and your neighbour. This is how I believe faith should be acted out. Regardless of our personal beliefs, we can still accord one another the respect and love of a fellow human being.
If you take, for example, the Abrahamic religions, they consider that individuals are created in the image of God. And so every individual, including every individual from the queer community, should, in my view, if they want to, have a place to freely participate in those religions.
I am out in the workplace. While I do not make it explicit that I'm with a her, if it comes up in conversations, I will not hesitate to correct assumptions made that I'm with a he. My values at work include being real and authentic. As such, I have no issues introducing my partner in work settings. I find that this actually helps others know me better as a whole human being. That enables me to have stronger relationships, which helps me to be more effective in the work that I do.
I feel really comfortable being out at work. I'm really fortunate to be able to work at a place like Corrs Chambers Westgarth, where every day I'm encouraged to bring my full identity. Feeling comfortable in the workplace, feeling that you're part of a team that values you for who you are, makes it so much easier to be open at work and to kind of be out and to be proud and comfortable with who you are. And we know that people are much better employees and much happier people when they're able to be out at work, when they're able to bring their full identity. I've been able to bring my husband to work events. My husband has met my colleagues, he's met my clients, and he's a major part of my work life as well as my home life. And it's really wonderful that I can share with him what I do at work and what I do with my colleagues.
I've been married to my wife for 6 months, and people at Chambers were obviously very excited about that for me, and people on my floor got me a gift. And when I returned from my honeymoon, a couple of members of the floor came to see how it was, and hadn't realised that I was marrying a woman, and so asked me, you know, what my husband was up to now. And I think that far from that being something that I was angry about, it just kind of went to show that there are some underlying assumptions that people have about others based on potentially the way they look or the way they present, and it's just something to kind of keep in the forefront of your mind when you're broaching these types of topics with people.
I've been very fortunate while I was at the bar. I was at the bar for about 12 and a half years before being appointed. I've been a judge for almost 14. I've always felt comfortable being out in the workplace. Again, that's a privilege again that I've had, and I appreciate that many people don't have that.
I do feel comfortable introducing my wife to people in work settings. I think that there is kind of an added security now to being married, and also an added kind of safety around the type of the type of people that we are in the intersections of our identity. So we are both white and cisgendered, and I think that together we're quite a palatable pair, but to people who may otherwise have difficulty with queer relationships. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that, you know, were I to present differently, or were she to present differently, or be a person of colour, for example, that might be more of a difficult or less comfortable environment. And that's something that I think is really important that we need to work on as a community.
My boss knows who my partner is, but there have definitely been jobs in the past where I have to keep that part of myself quiet, or not talk about my partner. And it's like, my partner is someone that I'm really, really proud of, and, you know, he's my best friend. So it's really, it sucks that there are still places that I can't talk about him as much as I want to, for safety reasons. And yeah, it sucks.
Employers should really lead from the top when it comes to LGBTIQA+ diversity. They can't expect LGBTIQA+ staff to always be doing things by themselves. There must be support from senior leadership in organisations, whether they be chief executives, senior partners, senior barristers, senior in-house counsel, senior government leaders as well, when we're talking about the public sector. It must be a whole of organisation approach.
I think with employers, it's important again that you have leadership in this space. But you need to have, I think, out leaders. And I guess that goes back to the answer that I gave a few moments ago, which is that I think it's, if you can be out in the workplace, I think it's a again, it's a matter of personal choice, but if you can and you're comfortable with it, it promotes visibility is good. If you see people like yourself in the workplace, then I think that obviously makes for a much more comfortable workplace. So I think being out is important if that's possible. Having leadership in that space, out leaders, or if not, at least leaders who are allies.
I think, again, employers can be doing research before they ask for labour from their employees. So, for example, there's a difference to a employer coming up to a trans employee and saying, you know, is there anything that I can do for you? Because that places the onus on the employee to sort of, you know, come up with all of these solutions and then fix it. Whereas an employer who has already sort of thought through different initiatives and then comes up to the employee and says, you know, well, here's sort of a list of things that I've looked at and I'm wondering which one would be the most helpful, you know, for you, or if you have any experience, what would be the most helpful, because that sort of takes all of the pressure off the employee for choosing sort of the wrong thing or having to do all of that research to just be told, no, like, we can't do that here, we're not that kind of workplace. And then it also shows the employee that the employer has gone out of their way to try and learn more, which I think is really effective team building as well.
There has to be training, obviously. Not everybody necessarily is even aware of the community or understands the community. So there needs to be, I think, training about the community, expectations, about respect in the workplace, making sure that, you know, obviously bullying, homophobia never ever occurs. Policies that are actually implemented. You know, there should be the provision of non-gendered facilities such as toilets. There should be, I think, work being done around the use of prefixes as well. Again, there shouldn't be assumptions being made. People should be asked, what pronouns would you like to be identified by? You know, things as basic as forms. You know, don't make assumptions about people's gender, about people's sexuality, and make sure that other people don't also make those assumptions as well. And lead by example. I think that's very, very important.
In terms of initiatives that I'd like to see, I think I'd like to see employers leading through example. So I think it's, again, up to the employers to advocate for their employees or even potential employees. I think it's important that if certain organizations have a quota to be met for a certain marginalized group, they make sure that that marginalized population isn't just staying at the lower levels of employment, but there are pathways for them to move through sort of the company, because often employees are hired to, again, fill the quota, but then there's not access to the higher levels because an organization is built for success of a specific type of person, and that specific type of person is often not from a marginalized group, and they can't fulfill the expectations, mostly social, that come with moving to different levels. So I think that also needs to be addressed.
My proudest moment as a member of the LGBTIQA+ community is actually a personal one. It's seeing members of my own family, some cousins, come out as members of my community, the LGBTIQA+ community. Knowing that they've come from the same cultural background as me, knowing that they have faced difficulties within that space and some biases, discrimination, and homophobia, etc. Seeing them be their full selves, be comfortable being their full selves, has been incredibly gratifying, and I'm so proud of them, and they provide support and courage to me, and I hope I do for them as well.
It was standing in the park the day that the marriage equality vote was announced, the results of the votes were announced. That was a tremendous moment. It still gives me goosebumps to feel when I think about it.
For me, probably the best moment, one of the most proudest moments I had as a member of the LGBTIQ community was the campaign for marriage equality.
The proudest moment was the marriage equality vote. I don't think I realised the gravity of that moment until the results were read out. I was in the car actually listening to the ABC radio, dropping Jamie off at school where she worked, and we pulled over just to hear the count, and it was such an emotive moment, and it was really overwhelming to know that, you know, almost 70% of the population, when they didn't have to vote at all, it wasn't mandatory, and after, you know, weeks and weeks of what was incredibly harmful discourse, that it wasn't even close, essentially. So I felt very proud of Australia in that moment, and even though I disagreed with the plebiscite as the vehicle through which that took place, that it was a moment of great pride.
And it was a tremendous moment for the community, obviously, but it was a tremendous moment, I think, for the nation. 2/3 of the country voted for, in a wide range of electorates and regions, city, rural, voted overwhelmingly for marriage equality, and that to me was my proudest day.
Like many people in our community, I was really opposed to the idea of having a voluntary postal plebiscite on whether or not we should have marriage equality in Australia. But when we had that plebiscite, the warmth and the encouragement and the support and the kindness shown right across the country was wonderful, and it was really humbling and inspiring to see so much broad community support for the LGBTIQ community and for the idea of equal love, and that everyone can be able to marry the person that they love. So for me, that was a real wonderful moment. I felt quite proud, and also I felt really included, and it was a really a key moment for me.
The reasonable man adapts himself to the world, whereas the unreasonable man adapts the world to himself. Therefore, all progress sort of relies on the unreasonable man. And I think that that's really important when, communicating to my younger self or any younger member of the community.
My younger self, from the lens of being part of the queer community, I think just continue to enjoy yourself, but think really carefully about the spaces that you occupy in terms of the intersections of your identity, and how you can always be a good ally for the people who are less privileged than you, who are also in the queer community.
I never thought that a person like me, someone who has a disability, I wear 2 hearing aids, I have speech impediment, I'm gay, I'm a member of the LGBTIQ community. I never thought that someone like me could be a partner in a law firm and have a career in corporate law. And I think you just have to be positive. You have to believe in yourself. Take the opportunity to come your way. Proactively put yourself forward for opportunity. You've got to put yourself out there and really take any opportunity that you can, and make sure that you're part of the conversation. Make sure that you're entering into the competition, that you're entering into the opportunities that come your way.
Sticking to being real and embracing who I am in all aspects of life has been really challenging, but also rewarding. So don't give up on these beliefs. Embrace the heartbreak moments and use them to grow into an even better human being. Love fiercely, be vulnerable, and lean into accepting myself, flaws and all.